Okay, good morning, everybody. I chair Chris Byer, call this virtual board of Boiler Rolls board meeting of June 1st, 2021 to order at 9:30 a.m. At this moment, Debbie, could you please take roll?
Yes, sir. Chair Chris Byer.
Present.
Vice Chair Roger Hendricks. Roger Hendricks, Vice Chair.
Present.
Thank you. Blake Alexander is absent. Thomas Ingstrom.
Present.
Ryan Garvey.
Present.
Thank you, Ryan. And Patrick Lamb.
Present.
Thank you so much, Pat. Greg Moyer is absent. Jeffrey Rodert.
Present.
Mr. Chairman, we do have a quorum. Thanks to Patrick Lamb.
Sorry about that. I'm having trouble hearing. Okay. So at this moment, has everybody had a chance to approve the amended agenda of business? Are there any further changes needed? Hearing none, I chair Chris Byer roll the amended agenda and order of business approved. Approval of the board draft meeting minutes of March 2nd, 2021. Are there any additions or corrections we need to address? Hearing none, I Chris Byer roll the draft minutes of March 2nd, 2021 final. The date of our next scheduled meeting is September 14th, 2021. Okay, next page. Okay, let's look at public comments. Tyler, would you care to address this for us, please?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the board. Tyler Glaze, policy analyst for the division. I do not believe we have any public comment today, and it does not appear that anyone has signed up or called in to make any public comment.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. Moving on to boiler program update. Mr. Tom, would you like to address this?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. For the record, my name is Tom Clark. I'm the Chief Boiler Inspector with Building Codes Division. Got a couple things I'd like to update the board on this morning. First is our routine update on overdues. So the state percentages are currently down. We're down to 17% overdue from 19% in the previous month. And the insurance inspection agencies, they're down to about 22% from 24% in the previous month. I think this trend reflects kind of what we're seeing in the general public, and we're starting to see more businesses open up as COVID restrictions start to lift. I expect that we'll continue to see numbers go down probably for the rest of the year. Those of you who looked closely at that overdue inspection report will notice that there's a new agency listed on that report, although they currently don't have any numbers. I just wanted to give you a heads up. For the first time in, as far as we can tell, decades, Oregon has authorized a new inspection agency. Their name is Sampo International. They have an AIA certificate from the National Board. They're registered with the Oregon Insurance Commission. and they're in the process of getting their first inspector commissioned here in Oregon. So we welcome them to the community and look forward to working with them. The next update I have for you, unfortunately, we had another boiler accident. Luckily, no loss of life. And the investigation on this one was primarily driven by Oregon OSHA, but we consulted on it and provided a little technical expertise. The issue was that we had a carbon monoxide exposure at a meat packing facility in the valley. I think it was 11 employees ended up in the hospital with carbon monoxide poisoning. A few of those were staying in the hospital overnight. Luckily, no deaths or serious illness. Everyone was back out of the hospital the next day. We assisted OSHA with their investigation, kind of determined a few contributing factors, including condensate drains on the boiler that were not properly connected. These are exhaust condensate, not steam condensate. So that's a potential path for CO to leak out of the boiler system. Also, there were issues with the gas regulator. Their intake and exhaust ducts were improperly arranged on the roof of the building. That's something where boiler code doesn't really apply, falls under the mechanical code, so it's not something our inspectors would normally catch. But their arrangement basically had the boiler intaking its own exhaust, and we believe that led to incredibly inefficient running, generating even more CO. The building also had a very unique shape where the roof was kind of arranged in a V pattern, and the exhaust came right up into that V, and we think that allowed CO to build up to higher levels. And then that day had some unique weather. Not only was it one of the first warm days of the spring, so all the doors of the building were open, but the wind happened to be blowing in a direction it doesn't normally, and we think that excess CO that built up on the roof was then blown down into the building and spread through the building via the natural circulation of the facility. The customer, from guidance through OSHA, took some corrective actions. They installed CO detectors around the facility, and they made some adjustments and repairs to their boiler system based on our findings. So that is all for the accident investigation. And the final update I have for the program is some good news. We filled the vacancy that we discussed at our last meeting. Mr. Bob Graham has come to join the state. A few of you who have been around the industry long enough will recognize that name. Not only did Bob previously work for the state about a decade ago, but he has many years of experience as an insurance inspector and as a water treatment specialist. Bob holds both his in-service and authorized inspector commission, as well as an R endorsement. Bob will be covering the Western Multnomah County, mostly downtown Portland, Columbia and Clatsop County areas. So big welcome to Bob. And if you have any questions for him or want to reach out, his contact information is available on our website. So that's all I have for now for a program update, Mr. Chair.
Good morning, this is Roger Hendricks. Through the chair, Chris is having some difficulty hearing what everybody's saying. I suggested he call in and mute his mic. I'm not sure if he's having some connection issues or what's going on with that, but I thought I'd let everybody know.
Thanks, Roger. We'll wait for Chris to get reconnected.
Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Okay, cool. Sorry. Technical expertise, I have none. Okay, so anyhow, On to new business. We have some recommendations from the administrator. Tyler, could you introduce this item, please?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Again, members of the board, Tyler Glaze, Policy Analyst for the division. So we have the recommendations to the administrator for the 2021 Oregon Boiler Pressure Vessel Specialty Code Committee. At the board's March 2nd meeting in 2021, the board established a code review committee and recommended the 2021 National Boiler Inspection Code as the model code for Oregon. The committee completed an analysis of the 2021 NBIC changes, existing Oregon code amendments, statewide interpretations, and alternate method rulings. And the committee met twice, beginning April 14th, 2021, and finalizing the recommendations to the board on May 5th, 2021. So there's a matrix just below this agenda item, and it includes the board packet, included in your board packet, and includes the full list of recommendations from the committee, along with any cost impacts noted by the committee. The board packet also contains a document with the committee's recommendations and supporting documentation. So adopting this new code will require BCD to engage in rulemaking. The division appoints the Board of Boiler Rules, this board, as a rule advisory committee under ORS 183.333. The division has taken steps to identify the rules it believes will be affected by the adoption of the new code and has prepared possible changes to the rule language that is also in your board packet. The division seeks the board's input on the draft rules included in the board packet. And we need recommendations on whether the draft rule changes will have a fiscal impact specifically. If so, the division seeks to understand the extent of that impact and whether or not the impact will be significant for small businesses. So this will require a motion, Mr. Chair, but generally the division is requesting feedback on this, specifically about the rules themselves and specifically about any fiscal impact that this new code will have. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Tyler. Chief Tom, would you mind going through the major changes and any fiscal impacts that we may have discussed?
Sure, I'd be happy to, Mr. Chair. Again, I'm Tom Clark, Chief Boiler Inspector with Building Codes Division. What I'll do, just kind of for the information of the board members who are not part of the committee and for the general public viewing at home. First, let me thank the members of the committee. I really appreciate their investment of time and effort. Those members included Chris Beyer, Dwight Kohler, Andrew Lee, Timothy Blomdahl, and Roger Hendricks. And a special thank you to Roger. He stepped up and led our first committee meeting when the chair was unavailable. We really appreciate you graciously doing that, Roger. And so the process that the Code Adoption Committee went through went through three phases. The first two were really driven by the committee, and the third was the division taking their input and running with it. So first step was reviewing all the codes, the new changes and all the new additions, and the new code books that we needed to adopt. The second was to review the Oregon amendments to the code to make sure that those amendments are still appropriate, or to see if we needed new ones to reflect the new rules. And then the final step is rulemaking, where we ensure that our current rules meet the intent of the new codes and that we adjust them as appropriate. So I'll start by summarizing the changes to the codes, then I'll talk about changes that were recommended to the amendments, and then lastly I'll cover the changes that were made to our rules. So starting with NBIC Part 1, major changes that were noted. There was a new requirement to add grounding or bonding to the supports of boilers and pressure vessels. The intent was to minimize electrolytic corrosion. The committee decided that this was a good idea and approved that change, but they also requested that the division add an amendment not to change the requirement at all, but to simply add a pointer to the Oregon Electrical Specialty Code to ensure that anyone installing these grounding or bonding straps or equipment will do so in accordance with the electrical code. The next major change, and this was not adopted, but I still want to address it because this was a big focal point for us in the big discussion, was CO detection. The NBIC added a requirement that all fuel fire boiler rooms have CO detectors, and it was determined between the committee and the division's input that we weren't going to be able to make this requirement work. The authority for gas detection lies in the structural code, and currently CO detection is only really required in residential sleeping spaces or commercial residential sleeping spaces connected to fuel-fired equipment rooms or garages. There's also not really any UL listings for the appropriate kind of equipment. There's only either single-station residential or big multi-station commercial with full-on systems that would be a huge financial burden on our customers. I think the committee was still interested in pursuing the issue. I think nationally they're still interested in pursuing the issue, but there's some work that needs to be done to find the right path forward. So that's why you'll find that the committee recommended not to adopt that change at this time. Other items we went through, there are some new requirements for temperature and pressure ratings for relief valve discharge piping. There were some concerns about the financial impact on this, but we did a little research and follow-up, and it felt that the impact would be minimal. I think it's a good update that allows us to ensure that the safety of relief valve discharges. Just requires the pipes to be able to withstand the temperature and pressure of the fluid that's going through them. Very reasonable requirement. Then a lot of our big changes this time around came through supplements. NBIC Part 1 Supplement 5 added some new requirements for thermal fluid heaters. Not equipment we see very commonly here in Oregon, but I think that when we do, having this additional guidance will be really helpful. There was also some guidance added for graphite pressure vessels. And then a big one, PVHOs. PVHO stands for pressure vessels for human occupancy. The big places where we see these are hyperbaric chambers. They're commonly used in hospitals as a form of treatment for burns. It can also be used in the diving industry for people who suffer from decompression sickness or other items. While the program regulates PVHOs, we didn't really have any good guidance for them. So this supplement addition is a huge help to us. It also led the committee to, as we'll discuss a little later, adopt a whole new code book, ASME's PVHO 1. The last supplement that we adopted, or the committee recommended to adopt, would be Supplement 9, which is guidance on the installation of high-temperature water boilers. Again, something we don't see quite as commonly in Oregon, but always good to have more guidance. Oh, I didn't mention this earlier, but if anyone has any questions, please save them for the end. If you have questions about what I'm discussing or items that I don't touch on, I'll be happy to address those at the end of this. For NBIC Part 2, two big changes. One was to remote visual inspection requirements. Previous editions of the code had requirements that allowed the use of borescopes and other tools to perform internal inspections on boilers and pressure vessels in areas that an inspector can't really get a direct line of sight to. But in the 2021 edition, the wording was changed really heavily, and it added significant requirements to the equipment that would be allowed to be used for such inspections. And the committee felt that this would severely limit the division and other inspection agencies' ability to perform these internal inspections due to the excessive financial burden it would place on us to purchase new equipment that met these requirements. So the committee recommended that we strike those requirements and simply allow us to continue using equipment as we have in the past. The other big update to NBIC Part 2 was a change to Form NB 136. This is the form that's used to record nameplate replacements. Previously, the code committee for the last code adoption had decided not to adopt the current form because its wording implied that an R-stamp holder was required to perform a code plate replacement, and they didn't believe that should be required or was necessary. The form has since been revised and no longer includes that wording, so the committee felt it was safe to update the latest version of that form. NBIC Part 3, only a couple of real updates I want to touch on. The major one is that they added a lot of guidance on using standard welding procedures and which standing welding procedures can be used and how to document them and things like that, all as part of the repair process. They also added requirements to allow the use of welding method 7, which is new to NBIC. And then they also added numerous guidance that I won't go into details on for various types of repairs. Another really big change, NBIC Part 4, a whole new code book for us. For those of you who are not aware, NBIC Part 4 covers pressure relief devices. It's a new book to the NBIC as of, I believe, 2017. We previously didn't adopt NBIC Part 4 because at the time it only included requirements that were also listed in Parts 1 through 3. There was no new or additional content there, and it wasn't really felt to be necessary. That's no longer the case, and so the code committee recommended that we adopt this new code standard. So it does include all pressure relief device requirements from installation and inspection code and repair code. It also includes information specifically on the new test-only program. So the national board has always had the valve repair program. It's their certificate of authorization for companies to perform testing adjustments and repair to pressure relief valves. They recently added a new program called the test-only program that allows companies authorization to only perform testing and make minor repairs or minor adjustments. No repairs, no assembly. They can just make minor adjustments. We've already had a few Oregon businesses show interest in this certification. So the code committee felt it was important to adopt this new standard and recognize it. And we'll touch on that again in rulemaking. ASME was unable to provide us with working drafts of the latest codes, so we didn't review those. Oregon does not traditionally amend ASME codes. That can be a real issue when working with out-of-state manufacturers and contractors. So no changes there that we need to address at this time. And as we previously mentioned, we newly adopted ASME's PVHO1 guidance. It just helps us better enforce requirements for pressure vessels for human occupancy. Gives us a manufacturing standard to point to. Moving on to amendments. If you look at the matrix of amendments, you see there are quite a few that we have revised and updated per the code committee's guidance. The big ones I want to touch on. 1.4.5, the reason we added this one was that we had other amendments elsewhere that addressed the boiler installation report covered in 1.4.5. Those amendments specifically did not adopt requirements enforcing that report, and we wanted to make sure for consistency's sake that we didn't adopt the report itself. We already have our own installation form that we fill out. It's called a registration form. So we don't need to make use of the boiler installation report from the National Board. Next one, 1.6.1, as we previously discussed, that amendment touches on grounding and bonding. All the code committee recommended there was that we add a pointer to the electrical code so that boiler installers know what requirements to follow when adding grounding and bonding. 1.6.9, we also previously discussed, that covers the CO detector requirement, which the committee recommended not to adopt. We rescinded a few amendments that adjusted NBIC wording from potential to potential energy. The code committee discussed it and they felt that that clarification wasn't necessary, as the word potential is pretty standard and commonly used throughout the industry. So those amendments were deemed unnecessary and rescinded. And then we just have a few other amendments that are cleaned up, made consistent with other amendments. Then last that I'd like to update you on is rulemaking. So we had a couple of rules that, based on the committee's input, the division developed wording to revise. The first one is Administrative Rule 918-225-0350. This is our exemption requirements for hot water storage tanks. The main thing we did was remove the heat input of 200,000 BTU requirement from that exemption criteria. This is to align ourselves with the newly adopted or proposed to be adopted ASME Section 4. This whole exemption criteria was based on Section 4 requirements. The idea was that if ASME says that a hot water storage tank doesn't need to be built to code, then we shouldn't either. And ASME revised their requirements in 2017, and our exemption criteria no longer matched their scope requirements. So they got rid of that 200,000 BTU requirement. We're just updating this exemption criteria to match that for consistency. The next rule that's been changed per committee guidance is 918-225-0430. That's just where we list all our adopted codes as part of the Oregon Boiler and Pressure Vessel Specialty Code. We've updated it to reference all the new standards that the committee is recommending we adopt. Next one is 918-225-0435. That's been revised because somehow it slipped past us and had wording in there that suggested that the NBIC would be printed in its entirety in Table 2B. We're definitely not doing that, so that wording has been struck. Next, 918-225-0745. This is our wording that recognizes the VR and the new TO stamp as requirements for customers looking to repair, adjust, and test relief valves. And that wording has been updated to recognize the TO stamp and give guidance as to when a VR or a TO stamp would be appropriate. And then the final adjustment we made is 918-225-0240. This is our definition section. And we only added any revisions to it to change the definition of pressure relief valve. The definition we had in there wasn't consistent with the National Board's definition or the general use in the industry of that term is more of a broad generic term for relief valves. It was kind of a more specific definition for another specific type of relief valve. So in order to appropriately use the term in 0745, the rule recognizing the TO and VR stamps, we updated our definition to better match that. So that was a very long-winded summary of all the changes that we have gone through, that the code committee recommended, and that we are now bringing to you for review and final motion. If there are any questions about any of the items I touched or any that I didn't touch, I'd be happy to answer them through the chair at this time. Okay, hearing none, I'll turn it back over to you, Mr. Chair.
Thanks very much, Tom. That was quite a lot for you to go through. So for me, being the first time involved in a process like that, it was very interesting to see how it's done, and my hat's off to all those that put all that information together for us, because it really streamlined the process and made it pretty easy for Tom to guide us through it all. And thanks to all the committee members that stepped up and helped, especially Roger. So if there's any discussion on this, we'll hear that now. Otherwise, we'd be looking for a motion to either approve the committee recommendations and proposed draft rules, or amend and approve, or disapprove.
And specifically, Mr. Chair, if I may, again, this is Tyler Glaze, policy analyst for the division. If the committee does note, or excuse me, if the board does note any fiscal impacts for small businesses, if you guys could note that right now, if that's possible. If not, otherwise, this motion, if the board does decide to approve it, will need a cost finding as well, which is noted in the help sheet.
Thanks, Tyler. Does anybody have anything to discuss? Okay, hearing none. Hey, before we get a motion, Tyler, can you explain just one more time? So whichever motion they put forward, we just need to include the language that says cost finding needs to be attached to the motion. Is that what I'm hearing?
Mr. Chair, if the board does decide to approve or amend and approve, if you will, that cost finding will need to be included. That's correct.
Okay, thanks for the clarification. All right. Anybody have a motion to make?
Mr. Chair, you may make a motion as well. Sorry, Tyler.
Mr. Chair, I don't know if you heard Debbie. This is Tyler Glaze, policy analyst for the division. You may make a motion as well.
Yeah, this is Pat Lamb. I'll make the motion. So are we just looking to approve the 2021 Oregon Boiler Specialty Code?
Mr. Lamb, if I'm hearing you correctly, are you making a motion to approve the committee recommendation and proposed draft rules and forward those to the administrator for rulemaking and subsequent adoption, with the finding that the added cost, if any, is necessary to the health and safety of the occupants or to the public, or necessary to conserve scarce resources? Am I hearing that correct?
This is Pat Lamb. That's exactly what I would like to say. Thank you.
I'll go ahead and do roll call if that's okay. Thomas Engstrom?
Yes.
Ryan Garvey?
Here.
Patrick Lamb?
Yes.
Jeffrey Rodert?
Yes.
Vice Chair Roger Hendricks?
Yes.
Chair Chris Spire,
Yes.
Mr. Chair, the motion passes unanimously.
Thank you, Debbie.
You're welcome.
Okay, looks like next item up is to review and approve committee recommendations for new continuing education courses and instructor applications. Tyler, would you walk us through this, please?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the board. Again, Tyler Glaze, policy analyst for the division. For this round of continuing education, the committee received 9 applications from 4 different organizations. Those included 4 courses which were recommended for approval and 5 instructors which were recommended for approval. There is a matrix just below this agenda item in your board packet if you would like to review that, and I am happy to answer any questions. Otherwise, Mr. Chair, this will require a motion.
Thank you, Tyler. Does anybody have any discussion on this? Hearing none, I would like to make a motion to approve the committee recommendations for approval or denial of the courses for instructors.
Mr. Chair, I'll go ahead and do roll call.
Thank you, Debbie.
Thomas Ingstrom,
Yes, I approve.
Ryan Garvey,
Yes, I approve.
Patrick Lamb,
Yes, I approve.
Jeffrey Rodert,
Yes, I approve.
Vice Chair Roger Hendricks,
Yes.
Chair Chris Spire.
Yes.
Mr. Chair, the motion passes unanimously.
Thank you, Debbie. Okay, looks like next we have a review request from HSI. Tyler, would you discuss this item?
Thank you again, Mr. Chair, members of the board. Again, Tyler Glaze, policy analyst for the division. From time to time, the division receives requests from what are nationally recognized or are purporting to be nationally recognized groups. What they're requesting is approval as a nationally recognized body that will not have to go through the normal continuing education process. They're requesting to be given this special status so that they can just begin teaching courses. Because they're such a large recognized body that the boards, the individual boards believe that they possess the qualifications and the competency to teach courses without going through their normal continuing education, review process. HSI has requested this status, and there's an administrative rule 918-035-0040 in Oregon that allows the appropriate board to approve a nationally recognized body to have this status and not have to go through that normal continuing education process. Part of that rule, the board has to specify if they wish to approve this status for this business, the scope of the courses taught by the provider and the type of credit that you'd be awarded for various courses. It's my understanding that HSI only teaches CPR, first aid, safety courses of that nature, so they would be alcohol-related courses. And if the board would like to approve those, the board should specify specifically what types of courses they wish to allow HSI to teach, essentially, going forward. And sort of put those side boards on HSI if they wish to approve that. They can also amend that request in any way they would like to. You can table this issue if you would like to. But that is the request that's before the board, and this will require a motion, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Tyler. Does anybody have any discussion on this topic?
Yes, through the chair, this is Roger Hendricks. I have looked at their website and have some questions, I believe probably for Tyler, if I may. So I'm under the impression that anything that is nationally recognized, such as OSHA 10, First Aid CPR, that may be a program from the AHA or other accredited organizations, is automatically accepted if submitted to the state without going through the approval process, unless I misconstrued how that works. So my concern here is some of their other options, and like you said, we'd have to kind of weed out which ones we'd approve and which ones we wouldn't. But they've got like things like active shooter training and cybersecurity training, which I don't really believe applies to the state and the boiler program. So those would be my concerns.
Thanks, Roger. That's a good point. So if Tyler, if you may, if we were to approve this HSI to be a recognized training provider, is it a blanket coverage for everything they train on, or can we limit it?
Mr. Chair, again, this is Tyler Glaze, policy analyst for the division. Yes, actually the rule requires you, if you do approve them as a nationally recognized organization, you will need to specify specifically what courses they will be authorized to teach going forward. So if the board would like to approve them and then limit them only to first aid, CPR, courses of that nature, they are not only free to do that, but they will need to do that if they grant their approval under the administrative rule.
Thank you for the explanation. Does anybody have any discussion further? Okay, hearing none. How would you all?
This is Tom. You're the chair. Shouldn't we weed it out before we vote on anything? Or can we figure that out right now?
I was kind of thinking maybe we could just weed it out within our motion. We could amend it to, what do you say, we amend it to limit it to just first aid and CPR courses. Roger, you might be better to speak with this because you're heavy in the training side of things.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Roger Hendricks. So again, looking at their website and the training that they provide, I would entertain a motion to amend what they are proposing and only allow the first aid CPR and the OSHA 10 training that they would be able to provide. I don't believe, looking at their website, that they have any other provisions that would give anything to the program that would be helpful to the program or to the people getting this training. I don't know if there's a more eloquent way to put that, Tyler. I'm not a wordsmith.
Mr. Hendricks, I believe we captured your motion.
And then, and then at a later date, they want to make another proposal, then we would look at that time.
Well done. Thank you, Roger. Does that help answer your question, Tom?
Yes, it does.
Okay. Tyler, would you mind reading back Roger's amended motion, and then Debbie can do a roll call?
Certainly. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Again, Tyler Glaze, policy analyst for the division. If I heard Mr. Hendricks correctly, I believe he made a motion to amend and approve the request from HSI to be recognized as a national organization and a nationally accredited continuing education provider for all courses submitted to the current code cycle, with the proviso that those courses fall under the first aid and CPR AED type courses and OSHA 10 courses only.
Through the chair, and OSHA 30 as well, Tyler.
Miss Debbie, would you mind taking a roll call vote?
Through the chair, I don't know how many people can see Debbie's status. It shows she's connected, but her phone is not green, so she might be trying to speak, but we may not be able to hear her.
If Debbie isn't able to take the vote, I have the roll call list here. So if, with her permission, I will just go through that and make sure we have captured everyone's vote. Do we have Jeffrey Roderick here?
Yes.
And how do you vote, sir?
Approved.
Patrick Lamb?
I approve.
Ryan Garvey?
Approved.
Thomas Engstrom?
Approved.
Blake Alexander?
Absent.
Absent. Excuse me. Roger Hendricks?
Approve.
And Chair Chris Beyer?
Approve.
And Mr. Chair, I believe that passes the motion.
Thank you, Tyler. He says we have no announcements. And that was it. But before I adjourn, I just want to say thanks, everybody, for sticking out. Today was pretty trying on the anyhow, having no further business, this meeting is adjourned at 10:18 a.m.